with that, I'd like to thank our sponsor, Open Doors. And I think we're ready for Q&A. If our speakers could reappear themselves and unmute. We have some questions. I will start with some questions from the audience. Everybody here? Yes. Peter Dalbeck had a question, I think for Kent, about the building system. He asks, what percentage of a building is required to integrate the complete system with the fuel cells and storage and all?
Well, thank you for the question. And it's a good question. Actually, we built it into the building.
Right.
But if our second plan, we would say 2 containers, 20-foot containers, that's what you need. 1 container is for the gas tubes and 1 container for all the equipment. So it's not much space we're talking about. But it's a good idea to have it near a building because you can use the roof for your solar panels or solar cells.
How large a building is that?
Our building is about 2,000 square meters. And you could use about 200 or 300 square meters would be enough for our system. But we want the surplus of energy, so that's why we have a larger building. And we have an idea of upscaling it. So that's why we took it on a big building.
So some other questions on that system. Ulf asks, were there any concerns by the residents about the safety of hydrogen?
Actually, we have not have any questions about it. We're the first facilities actually on our own building where we have our office, and we have a school, a gymnasium also in the building. But there has been no worries, and they're quite secure with the safety system we have built into this facility. And it's quite a low risk actually when you know what you're doing, to be honest. Hydrogen, I think, has a bad reputation, which is not quite deserved, since I've seen people using other gases like natural gas. Nobody reacts if they had that into building. But if you put in hydrogen gas, people suddenly start worrying. And it's the same risks actually we're talking about, and the same risk management. So I think it's all about enlightenment, what it's about. And actually, I think we find it easier to manage hydrogen gas and other gases today.
Now, you made the point that this system is effectively 90% efficient because you're capturing what would otherwise be waste heat. In all 3 of the processes, the electrolyzer, the compression, and the fuel cell. But net, effectively you're starting with electricity, and in the end you have electricity plus heat. What's the ratio at the end of it? I mean, if you start with 100 units of electricity, you end up with 90 units of energy. How much of that is heat and how much of it is electricity?
About 60 units is heat and 30 units is electricity.
So for your building, you needed that much heat, and therefore it's meaningful to say it was 90% efficient. But is that true all year?
Most part of the years. Of course, in the middle of summer, you don't need it that much. But on the other hand, during the summer, we have electricity from the solar cells immediately, and we don't need to use the hydrogen system or the power cell at least. So we have a smaller surplus of heating because it's only in the electrolyzers we have the heating. Then you're in a different situation. We actually looked at upscaling it together with the power company because we have central heating system in the city of Sjöbohem. And they are quite interested in taking this heat surplus, which comes when you have this process. And the electric company is interested in to get electricity. So actually, if you put it in a system, you can get out 80 to 90% of the energy back, but you have to cooperate. That's the point. You have to see it as a system and find the right partners. Then you could get quite good numbers. And that's usually what people don't do. They don't see the system and don't get the right partners into the business.
You need a place to use the heat to make it effective.
Yes, you do that. But normally in a building, you use, in Sweden at least, we use much more heat than we use electricity. So it's not a problem to have this difference between electricity and heating. Actually, we would need even more heat than we get. So if you looked at our system, we actually plan to have an electric boiler and also use the electricity because we have a surplus of electricity contra what we need in heating. So actually we need more heat when you come to building.
Maybe not so much here in San Diego as in Sweden.
No, maybe not.
Okay. That I just remind the audience that any questions you have, put into the Q&A chat. So, but in the meantime, Ulf has another question. Oh, I think that was answered in text. He has a question for Ole. The cost of production in Norway versus the United States. Is that about equal, or is there a cost differential?
So if you look at the value or valuable components, so some components today are sourced from the same places, like the battery cells primarily come from Asia, so that doesn't really matter. The main difference for us with the facility we have in Norway and the one we have set up in the US is that the Norwegian one is fully automated with robots, as you might have seen in that video that was shown. Whereas the US plant that we have started with is a manual plant. So obviously it's not going to be as productive. And then, as I also mentioned in my presentation, we still have a bit of work to do to develop a local supply chain for the components. So I would say today it is cheaper for us to manufacture this in Norway than the US, but there's no reason why it should be like that.
Well, I have you. Let me ask a question about the ships. It sounds like some of the ships that you've worked on are sort of hybrids, and some of them are all electric. What's the ratio?
It's probably something like 90 to 10 hybrid and 10% electric. And the main reason for that is that, well, there's two. So for a lot of vessels, it's just not feasible to have sufficient charging to make them fully electric. You can do it on a ferry, or the infrastructure is not in place. So I think you'll see that shift go more and more to be a balance, but I would still think for the foreseeable future, hybrid systems is going to dominate.
I had another question for Kent, that the tank that you're storing, that's not a cryogenic tank. You don't have to vent hydrogen to keep it cold or anything. It's just a high pressure tank.
It's actually, oh, I lost the word in English. It's not carbon fiber, no. It's made, maybe my Norwegian friend can tell me. It's kind of plastic. Sorry, I can't get the word right now. I check it up for you, but it's not steel. You could do it in steel, but it's a pressure tank. Since we use
my point is, it's being stored under pressure. It's not being stored cryogenically.
No, it's under pressure.
So you don't lose a certain percentage each day.
Nope, you don't lose anything. It's the only risk of losing is actually the vault going bad. So it's, if the vault into the tank would go bad and release it, that's the weak part actually.
I had Björn, you said seem to have a remarkable technology. I had a question about you showed a slide about the market, which shows an enormous market, but I wasn't clear. When you said $2 trillion, was that the total market for the drilling, or that's not the market just for the monitoring, is it?
No, that's the total market for those energy systems. With underground gas storage, carbon capture and utilization, geothermal, etc. Those two markets overall together is $2 trillion, which is
just your piece of it, which you seem to have the technological lead in. How big is that?
The monitoring part of it, I don't have a number right now, but it's anything I tell you right now will be a guess, so rather not.
And I'm assuming I'm going to ask you some questions about that world in general. I'm assuming you know some things about the nature of doing this, of drilling a cavity and storing gas in it. How many sites are there that are suitable for that? Can you do it anywhere, or does it need very specific geology?
Well, right now there are 412 sites in the United States. And California has two of the larger one. The one I was working with, PG&E, that's the 8th largest in the United States. But they're really distributed pretty much all over the country. But a natural gas storage reservoir is an old gas field, because the reason for being that the gas in that particular geology is that you have a sedimentary rock, which is porous, capped by a shale, which is the sort of the lid, if you want, preventing the gas from escaping.
So
the fact
it's
that
not a given that you could do this any place you wanted.
You have to.
If there was a gas field, then you're likely to be able to do it. But you couldn't just arbitrarily say, I wanted to do it here and do it.
Right. So, then another option, possibility is to do it in salt caverns. Salt, basically, is a plastic material,
right?
And it keeps a tight container,
right?
So there are several options, and because there are several types of geologies, it really is pretty much all over the country.
But for instance, I don't think San Diego has either one of those particular geologies.
So. There are big gas fields in California.
Right.
Yeah, the Aliso Canyon, for instance, which is by Southern California Gas, right, was a gas field, and I know there are gas fields. Wilmington in Long Beach is an oil and gas field.
Yes, I knew that. Yeah. That answers my question. One other question: is there a loss of gas stored in one of these fields, or can you assume you'll get all of it out again?
The recovery is very high. I don't have an exact percent, but it's very high there, because if you lose it, you also contaminate the environment. So
that's what I was wondering.
Yeah.
Okay, Vanessa Juan has a question for Edward. She wants to know, you showed the stages of automated operation. What are you currently on in California for your fall 23 launch that you mentioned? I guess what she said is, what stage will be operating within during the fall 23 launch you mentioned in California?
Great, thanks for the question. So I should clarify, the launch in California is going to be with human-driven electric trucks. So those will be operating at high speeds, freeways, everything. The levels 1 through 4 are just for our autonomous trucks. California at the moment actually prohibits as a state the use of heavy duty autonomous vehicles, which is something that we have been engaging with the Surface Transportation Agency and the governor's office to try to address, both as a company individually and part of a trade group of autonomous goods movement companies that are attempting to open that market up.
I had some follow-up questions about that. You showed how there was a remote operator. Do I understand that there's going to be one remote operator per vehicle?
At the moment, we're operating at a 1-to-1 ratio, but we envision in the future the remote operators will be able to supervise more than one truck at a time.
And do they have some sort of emergency override that they can activate at any moment?
Yeah, there are actually 2 specific emergency overrides tied to our remote operator station. The first is actually we have a dead man switch to make sure that when the person is allegedly there and paying attention, that they keep their foot on kind of a pressure sensitive pedal so that if their foot ever leaves that pedal, the vehicle will come to an immediate stop. But then in terms of an actual integrated person activated emergency stop, there's a giant red button so that if they need to initiate an emergency stop of the vehicle, they can hit the big red button and the vehicle will brake very quickly.
Let's see if I have more questions. Well, I have a sort of a generic question about this whole question about batteries and hydrogen, which I'm going to put out to the whole panel here. In general, there's this whole issue of batteries. Well, I don't want to say versus hydrogen. The distribution between batteries and hydrogen. It's clear to everybody, I think, that smaller, lighter vehicles are more likely to be successful with batteries, and larger, longer range vehicles are more likely to be served by hydrogen or some liquid that's carrying hydrogen, if you will. And that seems to be true both of land vehicles and ships. And it seems that, so for instance, hydrogen-powered passenger vehicles don't seem to have had nearly the success of battery-powered, personal cars. On the other hand, with heavy-duty trucks, it seems to be that there are companies pursuing batteries and there are other companies pursuing hydrogen. And Oli just made the point that it seems like smaller ships with shorter range are being served by batteries, but longer range ships can't be served by batteries alone. It seems to me that there's a lot riding on the question of figuring out what the point of transition is, or correctly predicting at what point the transition between vehicles that can be served by batteries and vehicles that have to be served by some storage thing. And I think Kent made the point that also applies to buildings, that for short periods, batteries can serve, but over longer periods, something else is needed. And it seems to me that going forward in planning, both in terms of planning businesses and planning for, the people who are purchasing these things, figuring out a way to correctly anticipate where that cutoff is going to be terribly important. And I think I'll put out to all of you, how do you imagine both the businesses who are planning their future, business plans, and the buyers who are buying these things, how would they make that plan and anticipate where, for a given size building, boat, truck, whatever, hydrogen or hydrogen storage things or batteries are the correct solution? Does anybody want to volunteer to be the first one to make a statement about that?
Okay, Kent, you go first.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think you actually put a point quite good there. As I said, I think both systems are interesting, but as you said, if I want to drive a car, you should see what's your pattern of using it. I mean, if you're only driving a couple of miles a day, you should definitely go for batteries. But if you're taking long rides, into states or whatever, you should definitely say hydrogen, because you have to see both sides of the coin. I mean, a battery car, you have to take long time of loading and so on, and a gas, you can go very quick and fuel up. As you said, long vehicle, long transport, I think that will be hydrogen, and battery is the short term, as we use it in a building, same thing. Short time, perfect with battery, it's better. But if you look on long term and you need more energy, you should go for hydrogen. I don't see there should be a fight between those two options. But at the moment, I think there is a fight in between people saying battery is the only answer or hydrogen is the only answer. I should say they should work together. I mean, the bad answer is use diesel, petrol. That's the bad answer. The good answer is use either of those technologies. You need both.
But just to build on that a bit, I think we need to clarify a bit when we say hydrogen, you know, the current fuel cells are using hydrogen fuel. I think what we'll see on large ship applications is extracting hydrogen from other fuels. Because just having huge hydrogen tanks on board ships, I don't see that going to fly for large passenger vessels because of safety, but also because of space. So ammonia and other, you know, there are other fuel cell technologies coming where hydrogen is the fuel, but it's extracted from other fuels. So I think that's part of it. But and then in the short term, I think or at least what we see in the cruise industry is that there are demonstrators now for fuel cells, and that will come. But it's just like the batteries. It's for hybrid systems. So it's, you know, let's say you want to go zero emission in a port, or you want to go zero emission in a remote area in a Norwegian fjord, let's say. We have delivered those kind of systems already. 10 megawatt hour systems have been installed on cruise ships already. So I think that's the short term thing. And then just give another example of, you know, a little bit more extreme, but I don't know if any of you have seen the Norwegian company Ulstein has launched this idea where they will use a nuclear fueling vessel, a salt and malt reactor, and then they'll have a fleet of battery vessels that will go out on missions and then sightseeing and then back to that fueling vessel. So there they're using nuclear, and I think it's been kind of taboo in the maritime industry, but even in marine now, we are looking at nuclear again as a viable option for these kind of long transport, high energy dense operations, like container ships, just like trucks. Container ships it's very, you know, predictable, simple operations, but they need a lot of energy. So nuclear might still be an option. So I don't think there's one right answer. There's multiple approaches, and then this as technology evolves, this will also change.
On the society-based or size scale, batteries would be very expensive, and we also need to look at the availability of the materials, lithium and cobalts and other things that goes into this batteries. So for society scale energy storage, I believe hydrogen is far superior to batteries. We have the infrastructure today to store methane, and we can convert essentially that technology into hydrogen storage. So once we do, we generate a lot of energy with wind, geothermal, and solar. We need to have a means to store it for high use times. So Obviously, batteries are good for cars and flashlights, but not for cities.
So we keep coming back to a question of scale.
It's a scale issue, yeah.
There's also a few other things that, at least for us, is critical. I mentioned recycling. So the batteries we use are 98% recyclable, but today there isn't really an industry ready to take those batteries in. And luckily, I mean, we're still in the early years, so we haven't really seen that many systems come out yet. But that needs to be developed because for the supply chain and like Björn mentioned, the constraints.
You mentioned especially for ships, it sounds like hydrogen is not itself going to be the storage medium. It's going to be something, ammonia or methane, or that's going to be converted. What's the conversion efficiency? I mean, if hydrogen is converted to ammonia and then cracked again to use in fuel cells, what's the net loss in that?
That I don't honestly know. But I wouldn't say that there's no purely hydrogen applications. There are several pilots out there now, and I think California is a good example. We are putting in hydrogen fueling stations, let's say in San Francisco. I think we had a presentation earlier that mentioned one project. So I think there will be, but I think there are smaller applications. At least as we are now invested in the fuel cell space, we see kind of the next few years, it's hydrogen PEM fuel cells, but then beyond that, we're looking at kind of the next evolution of fuel cells extracting hydrogen. So, but there are applications for hydrogen for sure.
I think it's time to give it back to Hans to wrap this up. And I thank all the panelists for fascinating presentations. And I think Hans will wrap up the thing.
I would like to thank the team that has made this possible. Paulina, Fanny, Felicia, Occo, and Nora, and not the last least, the Steven Spielberg of San Diego, Ulf Sundberg. I would also like to thank the Center for Community Energy to be part of this, part of the plan and everything. I would like to thank Norwegian American Chamber of Commerce and Finnish American Chamber of Commerce. And of course, all our sponsors and speakers. Without them, it wouldn't have been possible. And I've already looked for a tentative date next year, November 15 to 16. Pencil that into your calendars. And see you next year, and thank you all. Bye-bye.